Picture a city that defies every rule of survival. No fertile soil, no mineral wealth, no standing army, just mud, salt water, and a harsh lagoon battered by wind and tide. Logic demands this place should have withered and died within a generation. Yet for a millennium, this improbable settlement became one of the wealthiest, most powerful states the world has ever known. This is Venice, La Serenissima, the most serene republic. Tonight we unravel an extraordinary paradox. How did merchants build an empire? How did a city without resources become the bridge between East and West? How did refugees in a swamp create a maritime dominion that shaped the medieval world? We'll witness the genius of their shipbuilders, sail alongside their fleets into the chaos of the Crusades, and follow their merchants as they monopolize the world's most valuable trade. This is a tale of brilliant innovation and ruthless pragmatism, of political intrigue and slow, elegant decline. But before we begin, I'd appreciate if you'd take a moment to like this video and subscribe to the channel. It's a simple gesture that makes an enormous difference, and I'm genuinely grateful for your support. I'm also curious, where in the world are you right now, and what hour has brought you here tonight? I'd love to hear from you in the comments. Now, settle in. Let the noise of the present fade away. And join me as we journey back to a world of marble palaces rising from the sea, silent gondolas gliding through mist, and the intoxicating scent of eastern spices drifting through narrow streets. Venice's origin story begins not with ambition but with terror. The 5th century AD witnessed the death throes of the Western Roman Empire. Across northern Italy, the civilized Roman world was being torn apart by waves of barbarian invasions. The most devastating were the Huns, savage horsemen from the steppes who swept westward under their legendary chieftain Attila, leaving only ash and bones in their wake. As flames consumed their cities, the Roman inhabitants of the region, the Veneti, fled for their lives. They sought sanctuary in the one place a cavalry army could never follow, the vast, inhospitable lagoon along the Adriatic coast. This was no promised land. It was a nightmare landscape of mudflats, brackish marshes, and unstable islands that shifted with the tides. But it offered one precious advantage: safety. The shallow, maze-like waterways formed a natural fortress that horses couldn't penetrate and armies couldn't navigate. The first Venetians were refugees stripped of everything: fishermen, salt workers, farmers who'd watched their world burn. On these miserable muddy islands, they began constructing an entirely new kind of settlement, a community built not on Earth's solid ground, but on the sea's uncertain embrace. But how do you raise stone buildings on liquid mud? The Venetians engineered an ingenious solution. They drove thousands upon thousands of sharpened wooden, piles deep through the soft sediment, forcing them down until they struck the compressed clay layer far below. This created a dense underwater forest, a stable foundation hidden beneath the waves. Atop these pilings they laid thick timber platforms. Only then could they begin constructing the stone bases of houses, churches, and palaces. They were literally building a city on an inverted forest. This hostile environment forged a unique people. Their streets were canals, their vehicles were boats, every aspect of their existence oriented toward the water. This daily struggle with the sea taught them pragmatism, ingenuity, and an unshakable focus on survival. The city born from fear would not remain a humble refuge. Its unique position was about to transform it into a power that would reshape the Mediterranean world. As scattered lagoon settlements coalesced into a single thriving city, the Venetians faced a critical challenge. Technically, they belonged to the distant Byzantine Empire. In reality, they were independent. They needed leadership to unify them, but their entire history was one of fleeing mainland tyrants and warlords. Their deepest terror was recreating the very system of autocratic rule they'd escaped. Their solution was a political masterpiece, a government structure that would maintain stability for 1,000 years. In the 8th century, they established the office of the Doge. The title derived from the Latin dux, meaning leader. The choice was deliberate. He would be a leader, not a monarch, a prince, but never a king. Crucially, he was elected for life by the city's most powerful families, not born into power. The office symbolized state continuity, but its authority was constrained from the beginning. True power resided with the wealthy merchant families whose fortunes depended on maritime commerce. Their nightmare was an ambitious doge seizing absolute control, establishing a hereditary dynasty and sacrificing commercial prosperity for personal glory. The entire Venetian political system evolved into an elaborate machine designed to prevent exactly that. The government was a republic, but emphatically not a democracy. It was a rigid merchant oligarchy. The foundation was the Great Council, an assembly comprising members of all noble families. This body held ultimate authority, electing members to all other councils that administered the city. The Doge himself became a sort of constitutional monarch, bound by an exhaustive oath of office. The restrictions on his power bordered on paranoia. He couldn't name his successor. His sons were barred from holding office during his reign. His personal correspondence had to be opened and read by state censors before reaching his eyes. He couldn't even leave Venice without permission from his own councils. To guard against internal threats, the Venetians created one of history's most feared institutions, the Council of Ten. This small, secretive committee functioned as a state security service tasked with uncovering treason and conspiracy. Its agents were everywhere. Citizens were encouraged to anonymously denounce neighbours by depositing accusations into stone letterboxes placed throughout the city, the infamous Bocca di Leone, the lions' mouths. The Venetian system was paradoxical, a republic founded on profound institutionalized mistrust. Yet this intricate web of checks and balances proved remarkably effective. While the rest of Europe tore itself apart through feudal kings' ambitions, Venice enjoyed enviable stability. This stability allowed the city to focus all its energy on a singular obsession, accumulating wealth and constructing a maritime empire. During its first centuries, Venice wasn't truly independent. It existed in the long shadow of Christendom's greatest power, the Byzantine Empire, the Eastern Roman Empire ruling from its magnificent, fabulously wealthy capital Constantinople. Venice was officially a Byzantine duchy, a distant semi-autonomous province of a vast ancient empire. This relationship shaped the city's early character profoundly. Venice straddled two worlds, geographically Western but culturally, artistically and politically oriented toward the east. The breathtaking golden mosaics adorning St. Mark's Basilica were created by Byzantine masters, or in the Byzantine style. This deep connection to Constantinople provided Venetians unique access to the world's most sophisticated markets and trade routes. The Venetians were shrewd, pragmatic subjects who exploited their imperial relationship ruthlessly. Their growing navy, the region's finest, often served as a mercenary fleet for Byzantine emperors. When the emperor needed help repelling Norman and Arab threats in the Mediterranean, Venice provided vital naval support, always at a price. The most significant payment came in 1082. Byzantine Emperor Alexios II Komnenos desperately needed Venetian assistance against an invasion. In exchange for their fleet service, he issued an imperial decree known as a Golden Bull. This document granted Venetian merchants staggering privileges throughout the Byzantine Empire. They could trade completely tax-free in most major imperial ports, including Constantinople itself. They were even allocated their own district and docks in the capital. This was a massive economic coup, giving Venice enormous competitive advantage over rivals like Genoa and Pisa. But it gradually began bleeding the Byzantine economy dry. The empire was now deprived of massive tax revenues. The relationship shifted. The Venetian servants were becoming richer and more powerful than their Byzantine masters. Over the following century, this imbalance bred growing tension and resentment. Constantinople's citizens grew to hate the arrogant, wealthy Venetian merchants dominating their city's commerce. This hostility occasionally exploded into violent riots and massacres. The old alliance had curdled into deep mutual suspicion and bitter economic rivalry. By the 12th century's end, the bond was completely shattered. Venice was no longer a servant, but a powerful, independent competitor. The Venetians viewed the weakening Byzantine Empire as both commercial threat and immense opportunity for plunder. They knew Constantinople's wealth intimately. They knew its defensive weaknesses. This long, complicated history of service, economic domination, and bitter resentment forms the crucial backstory for the shocking events to come. As Venice grew in power and distanced itself from its Byzantine overlord, its leaders recognized the city needed a new spiritual identity. A great power required a great patron saint, one whose prestige could rival Rome's and Constantinople's apostles. Their current patron was a minor Byzantine figure, a constant reminder of former subservience. To be truly independent, Venice needed a relic of the highest order. They set their sights on St. Mark the Evangelist himself. One problem: St. Mark's sacred remains rested in a shrine in Alexandria, Egypt, then under Muslim Caliphate control. In 828 AD, two Venetian merchants, Buono da Malamocco and Rustico da Torcello, embarked on an audacious, sacrilegious mission: holy theft, an act of pious larceny to bring the evangelist home. The merchants sailed to Alexandria. Through bribery and persuasion, they convinced the shrine's keepers to surrender the saint's body. They claimed to be saving the holy relic from potential desecration by local rulers, giving their heist a veneer of religious duty. Their greatest challenge was smuggling the body past the caliph's customs officials at the port. Here the merchants displayed the cunning and pragmatism that would define their republic. They placed the saint's body in a large basket and covered it with layers of pork and cabbage leaves. As the story goes, when Muslim officials, who consider pork unclean, came to inspect the cargo, they recoiled in disgust and waved the ship through without proper search. The daring plan succeeded perfectly. St. Mark's arrival in Venice was transformative. The entire city erupted in celebration. No longer a cultural province of Byzantium, Venice was now a major pilgrimage destination. Its sacred authority could rival Rome itself. The magnificent golden St. Mark's Basilica was commissioned as the evangelist's permanent home, becoming the Republic's spiritual and political heart. With their new patron came a powerful symbol. St. Mark's traditional icon is a winged lion. Venice immediately adopted this as its own. The Lion of St. Mark, often depicted holding a book, became the Republic's official emblem, stamped on coins, flown from warship banners, and carved into the gates of every conquered city. The theft of a saint's body was the ultimate declaration of Venetian ambition. It was a sacred act of larceny that severed old ties and laid the divine foundation for the independent empire to come. Venice now possessed stable government and divine protection. It also commanded growing naval power, a fleet strong enough to be hired as mercenaries by the Byzantine emperor himself. But what was the source of this incredible maritime might? The answer, the Republic's true physical heart, was forged in a single vast, highly secret location. Tucked away in the city's eastern corner, behind high red brick walls and guarded towers, lay the Venetian arsenal. It wasn't merely a shipyard. It was Europe's largest and most efficient industrial complex, centuries ahead of its time. The arsenal's genius was its revolutionary production approach. In an age when ships were typically built one at a time, the Venetians pioneered modern assembly line principles. The process began with mass production of standardized, interchangeable parts. Within the arsenal's sprawling complex, dedicated workshops filled with highly skilled workers, the arsenalotti, produced nothing but identical components: oars, rudders, masts, and vast quantities of rope. These parts were stored by the thousands in massive warehouses ready for instant use. Ship assembly occurred along a production canal flowing through the complex's heart. A bare, pre-built hull would be towed in at one end. As it moved down the waterway, it stopped at a series of stations. At each stop, a different guild of specialized arsenalotti swarmed the vessel, fitting it with the specific parts they'd mastered. One team installed rowers' benches, another stepped the mast and rigged sails. In final stages, the ship was armed, first with crossbows, later with powerful cannons cast in the arsenal's own foundries. This system was astonishingly efficient. Legend tells of a visiting dignitary who, in a famous demonstration, witnessed a complete war galley being fully assembled and armed in the time it took him to eat a leisurely dinner. At the peak of its power, Venice could outfit and launch a fully equipped warship in a single day. This incredible speed gave the Republic a strategic advantage no rival could match. In wartime, they could generate a massive fleet almost instantly, stunning enemies with the sheer scale and speed of their mobilization. The arsenalotti were an elite, privileged class, state employees with guaranteed lifelong jobs, pensions, and even family housing. In return for this security, they were fiercely loyal and sworn to secrecy. They were guardians of the state's most vital military and industrial secrets. The arsenal was a fortress not just against enemy fleets, but against the prying eyes of rival powers desperate to steal Venice's industrial secrets. The arsenal was more than a shipyard. It was the physical manifestation of Venetian ingenuity and pragmatism. The factory allowing a small city built on mud and salt water to project immense naval force across the Mediterranean. The Doge's palace provided the will. The arsenal provided the weapon. The power forged in the arsenal's dark halls was magnificently displayed to the entire world on one special day each year, the Feast of the Ascension. On this day, the city celebrated its most important ceremony, a ritual perfectly capturing the Republic's soul. It was called the Marriage to the Sea. The ceremony's centerpiece was the Doge's state barge, the Bucentoro. This wasn't a war galley. It was a floating palace, a breathtaking masterpiece of Venetian craftsmanship. The ship was immense, a double-decked vessel propelled by the arsenal's most skilled oarsmen. Its entire surface was covered in elaborate mythical carvings, heavily gilded with pure gold leaf. When the Bucentoro was brought from its special shelter, it reportedly looked like a golden mountain floating on water. On the festival morning, the Doge would board the Bucentoro dressed in his finest ceremonial robes, accompanied by the highest officials and foreign ambassadors. From there, he led a grand procession of hundreds of boats into the lagoon, a spectacle of incredible pomp and civic pride. The entire city turned out to watch the golden barge followed by a flotilla of brightly decorated gondolas and private yachts. The air filled with music, pealing church bells and Venetian cheers. The procession's destination was the Lido Inlet, where the lagoon's calm waters meet the Adriatic Sea's open expanse. Here the flotilla would fall silent, and the Doge would perform the ancient sacred ritual. He would take a consecrated golden ring, hold it aloft for all to see, then recite the solemn, unchangeable Latin vow, Desponsumus te mare, in signum veri perpetuique domini. We marry you, our sea, as a sign of true and perpetual dominion. With those words, he would drop the golden ring into the waves. The act was a yearly renewal of the sacred contract at the city's existence's heart. It was a prayer for sailors' safety and trade prosperity. But it was also a powerful statement of political reality, declaring to the world that the Adriatic was Venice's territory, that the sea was their private highway, and they were its undisputed master. For Venetians, this was no mere metaphor. Their city was born from water, protected by water, and enriched by water. The sea was their farm, their fortress, and their entire reason for being. To be married to the sea was to state the fundamental truth of their world. This magnificent ceremony was the ultimate expression of the Venetian soul, a golden spectacle proclaiming the source of all their power and glory. At the dawn of the 13th century, Pope Innocent III declared the Fourth Crusade, a new holy war to sail to the Holy Land and reclaim Jerusalem. Feudal lords from France and the Holy Roman Empire answered the call, assembling a magnificent army of knights and soldiers. But to strike at Muslim power's heart in Egypt, they needed a fleet. Only one city in the world could provide it: Venice. Venice's leader at this time was one of the Middle Ages' most remarkable figures, Doge Enrico Dandolo. He was ancient, well into his 90s, and blind. Yet his mind was sharp as any man half his age, and his ambition for Venice's glory was boundless. The Crusader envoys arrived and made their request: a fleet to transport 33,000 men and 4,500 horses. Dandolo and the Venetians drove a hard bargain. They agreed to suspend all normal commercial activities for over a year, dedicating the arsenal's entire industrial might to this one massive project. The price for this service was a staggering 85,000 silver marks. The Crusaders agreed, and Venice went to work. In summer 1202, the Crusader army arrived at Venice's Lido. A crisis immediately erupted. The army was far smaller than promised. Thousands of knights had taken different routes or dropped out. Consequently, they could only pay a fraction of the enormous agreed-upon price. The situation was disastrous for both sides. A massive armed foreign army was now trapped on a lagoon island, unable to fulfill its holy vow. Venice teetered on bankruptcy's brink, its expensive new fleet sitting idle in the harbour. In this crisis moment, the blind Doge Dandolo revealed his cunning genius. He made a proposal to the desperate Crusaders. They could pay off their debt not in silver, but in service. Their first target, he announced, would not be Egypt. It would be the Christian city of Zadar, a Venetian trading rival on the Dalmatian coast. The Crusaders were aghast. They'd taken a sacred oath to fight Christ's enemies. Now they were being asked to attack a fellow Christian city for Venice's commercial benefit. Many protested this blatant hijacking of their holy mission. Some abandoned the crusade in disgust, but the majority, trapped in debt and desperate, reluctantly agreed. To seal the deal, the aged Enrico Dandolo performed a masterful act of political theatre. During a great mass in St. Mark's Basilica, he declared that he, despite his age and blindness, would personally take the cross and lead the crusade. The great fleet, paid for with Venetian silver and crusader desperation, finally set sail. Dandolo's great gamble had paid off. He'd successfully diverted the entire Fourth Crusade onto a new, unforeseen, controversial path, replacing its sacred purpose with the cold, hard logic of Venetian ambition. And so, in autumn 1202, the great Crusader and Venetian fleet appeared before Zeta's harbour. When the city's people saw the massive armada, they were terrified. They were devout Catholics. They hung crucifixes and papal banners from their walls, pleading with the Crusaders not to attack fellow Christians. The Pope himself had explicitly forbidden the act, threatening the entire army with excommunication. But the Crusade's leaders were trapped by debt, and the blind Doge Dandolo was relentless. For Venice, this was business. The siege began. After a brief, brutal assault, Zadar fell. The knights and soldiers, having now paid a portion of their debt in service, entered and sacked the city. It was a grim prelude to what was coming. The army wintered in the conquered city. During this cold, tense winter, the Crusade's destiny changed forever. A new player arrived, a young exiled Byzantine prince named Alexios Angelos. He made the Crusader leaders a breathtaking offer. He asked them to sail to Constantinople and help him take the throne. In return, he would pay their entire debt to Venice, finance their onward journey to Egypt, and submit the Orthodox Church to the Pope's authority. For the French and German knights, this was tempting justification. They could restore a rightful heir and unite the Church while solving their financial crisis. For the Venetians, it was the opportunity of a lifetime. Constantinople, the queen of cities, was the world's wealthiest metropolis and Venice's greatest commercial rival. The chance to place a friendly, indebted emperor on its throne was a prize for which Enrico Dandolo was willing to risk everything. In summer 1203, the Crusader fleet arrived before Constantinople's immense legendary walls. The citizens of the world's greatest Christian capital were stunned to see a fellow Christian army at their gates. The initial assault succeeded. The usurper on the throne fled. Young Prince Alexios was installed as co-emperor, but the triumph was short-lived. The new emperor quickly discovered the city's treasury was empty. He couldn't pay the vast sums promised. Tensions exploded. The Crusader army camped outside the walls felt betrayed. They watched as a popular uprising overthrew their puppet emperor, who was brutally murdered. With no hope of payment, the Crusaders made a fateful decision. They would take their payment by force. In April 1204, they unleashed a full-scale assault. The Venetian fleet played a crucial role, their ships acting as floating siege towers, allowing them to storm the sea walls. After a desperate battle, the defences were breached. The Crusader army poured into Christendom's wealthiest city. What followed was one of medieval history's most shameful events, the Great Sack of Constantinople. For 3 days, the city was subjected to an orgy of looting, destruction, and murder. Palaces and churches were stripped of priceless holy relics and ancient treasures. The great library burned. Magnificent bronze statues were torn down and melted for coin. Venice played a shrewd, calculated game in dividing the spoils. The French knights took land, but Venice took the prizes that mattered most for a maritime empire. They looted the famous 4 bronze horses, a future symbol for St. Mark's Basilica. They took control of 3/8 of Constantinople itself. And they claimed a string of strategic ports and islands throughout the Byzantine Empire, including the crucial island of Crete. The Fourth Crusade never reached the Holy Land. Instead, it shattered the ancient Christian Byzantine Empire. It also enriched Venice beyond its wildest dreams. With Constantinople's wealth in their vaults and its most strategic ports under their control, Venice was no longer just a powerful city-state. It was now a true empire, the undisputed master of the Eastern Mediterranean. In the chaotic aftermath of Constantinople's sack, French and German Crusader lords scrambled to carve out feudal kingdoms, claiming vast tracts of land from the fallen Byzantine Empire. The Venetians played a much more calculated strategic game. They had no interest in governing large, rebellious inland populations or managing feudal estates. Their ambition wasn't for land, it was for the sea itself. From the fallen empire's spoils, they meticulously crafted a new kind of empire perfectly suited to a republic of merchants, the Stato da Mar, the state of the sea. While other crusaders claimed their share in territory, Venice claimed its share in trade routes. Their strategy was to create a long, unbroken chain of fortified ports and islands acting as stepping stones, a maritime highway stretching from the Venetian lagoon to the Black Sea, a string of pearls, where each pearl was a strategic harbour, naval base, and commercial outpost guaranteeing Venetian shipping's safety and supremacy. From the Byzantine Empire's partition, Venice acquired key locations. They secured the most important ports along Greece's coast. They took control of the Cyclades Islands in the Aegean. But their greatest prize was the massive, strategically vital island of Crete. Known to Venetians as the Kingdom of Candia, Crete became their most important overseas colony. Its position allowed them to dominate the entire eastern Mediterranean shipping lanes. It served as a crucial naval base and valuable goods source for centuries. This wasn't a settlement empire, it was a commercial and military machine. Each island and port in the Stato da Mar served a specific purpose. They were safe harbours where Venetian merchant galleys could rest, resupply and shelter from storms and pirates. They were naval stations where Venetian warship squadrons could be based, allowing them to police sea lanes and project power far from home. And they were commercial centres where Venetian merchants collected local goods to be funneled back to Venice's markets. Life in these colonies was typically overseen by a Venetian governor, a nobleman sent from the city to rule over the local, mostly Greek population. It was often a pragmatic, business-like form of rule, more concerned with collecting taxes and ensuring smooth trade flow than changing local culture. The Stato da Mar was the ultimate expression of the Venetian worldview, an empire designed by merchants for merchants. Every island, every harbour was chosen not for its size but for its strategic and commercial value. This network of naval bases and trading posts was the hardened skeleton supporting their vast commercial body, allowing them to control wealth's flow from east back to their city's heart, with unparalleled efficiency and security. They'd built their city on water. Now they'd built their empire on it as well. The Venetian empire of ports and islands was designed to funnel the East's riches westward. But one Venetian's journey went far deeper, beyond familiar trade routes to the very source of those riches. His name was Marco Polo, and his story would become history's most famous travelogue. The adventure began in 1271. Marco, then just a 17-year-old boy, set out from Venice with his father and uncle. They were merchants on an ambitious trading mission. Their journey wasn't a swift sea voyage, but a long, arduous overland trek following the legendary network of paths known as the Silk Road. For 3.5 years they travelled, crossing Anatolia's mountains, Persia's deserts, and the towering Pamir Mountains, the roof of the world. Finally, they arrived at their destination, the opulent, almost mythical court of Kublai Khan, the Mongol Emperor of China. The Khan was a sophisticated, curious ruler fascinated by these strange men from a distant land. He took particular liking to young Marco Polo, finding him intelligent and a keen observer. For the next 17 years, Marco Polo didn't just trade, he became an honoured emissary and official in the Khan's vast, powerful empire. He travelled all over China on the Khan's business, witnessing wonders no European had ever seen before. He saw cities of immense size, far grander than anything in Europe. He saw the burning of black stone, coal, for heat. He saw paper money's use, a concept completely alien to the West. He witnessed the efficient Mongol postal system's workings and heard tales of distant Japan. After 24 years away from home, the Polos finally received the Khan's permission to return. Their journey back was equally perilous, this time by sea through the South China Sea and across the Indian Ocean. When they finally arrived back in Venice in 1295, they were almost unrecognisable, dressed in tattered Mongol clothing. Legend says their own family didn't believe it was them at first. To prove their story, they cut open their rough-clothed seams, and a river of priceless jewels, rubies, sapphires, diamonds hidden from pirates and bandits, poured onto the table. Marco Polo's incredible adventure had one final ironic twist. A few years after his return, Venice was at war with its great rival Genoa. Marco, now a wealthy man, commanded his own galley in the Venetian fleet at the Battle of Curzula in 1298. The Venetians were crushed, and Marco Polo was captured and thrown into a Genoese prison. It was there, in that prison cell, that he met a writer of romances named Rustichello da Pisa. To pass time, Marco Polo dictated his entire journey's story to his cellmate. The resulting book, The Travels of Marco Polo, became an instant sensation. Though many at the time dismissed it as The Million Lies, a collection of fantastic fables, it was the first detailed, realistic account of the Far East Europe had ever seen. It would inspire future generations of explorers, including Christopher Columbus himself, and would forever cement the legacy of a Venetian merchant who journeyed to the world's end and back. Venice had built an empire, and its merchants, like Marco Polo, had journeyed to Earth's ends. But the great rivalry with Genoa, their powerful twin on Italy's other side, wasn't yet settled. One final, brutal war was needed to decide the Mediterranean's true master. This was the War of Chioggia, the last, most desperate struggle between the sea's two lions. The war began in 1378. In a brilliant, daring move, the Genoese fleet achieved what no enemy had ever done. They sailed into the Venetian lagoon itself. They smashed through the city's outer defences and captured the strategic port of Chioggia at the lagoon's southern end. For the first time in its history, Venice was directly threatened, its own waterways occupied by a hostile fleet. This was the Republic's darkest hour. The enemy was at the very gates. The Genoese fleet established a blockade, cutting Venice off from the sea, its only source of food and wealth. The city began to starve. The Genoese admiral, full of confidence, sent a message to the Venetian doge declaring he wouldn't grant peace until he'd tamed the Lion of St. Mark itself, a promise of total conquest. In this desperate moment, the Venetians mounted one of naval history's most remarkable comebacks. They rallied every ship and every man they had left. They freed their best admiral, Vetta Pisani, from prison to lead them. He proposed a supremely audacious gamble: blockade the blockaders. Under night's cover, the Venetian fleet sailed south, reaching the narrow sea channels leading out of the Chioggia lagoon, the only escape route for the Genoese fleet. There they sank old, heavy ships filled with stone, completely sealing the exits. The entire Genoese fleet, victors a moment ago, was now trapped inside the very harbour they'd just conquered. The situation was completely reversed. Venice's siege became Chioggia's siege. For 6 gruelling months, the Venetians held their position, cutting off all food and supplies to the trapped Genoese sailors. It became a brutal war of attrition. Finally starving with no hope of rescue, the once mighty Genoese fleet was forced into humiliating total surrender. The victory was absolute. The War of Chioggia had broken Genoese sea powers back forever. While Genoa would remain a financial centre, its challenge for maritime supremacy was over. Venice now stood alone, the undisputed master of Mediterranean trade. Having vanquished its greatest rival in a war it had almost lost, the Republic was now truly free to enter its golden age. Venice now stood alone as the Mediterranean's master. Its victory over Genoa had secured its trade routes. Its empire of ports and islands was a perfectly designed machine created for a single purpose: controlling the most valuable, profitable trade on Earth. In medieval and Renaissance Europe, true wealth wasn't just gold, it was spice. Pepper, cloves, cinnamon, and nutmeg were commodities of almost unimaginable value. They were meat preservatives, essential medicine ingredients, and the ultimate status symbol for the rich. Their origins in the far-off spice islands of the East were a complete mystery to most Europeans, making them seem magical and exotic. A small sack of peppercorns could be worth more than a man's entire lifetime of wages. A pound of nutmeg was often valued more highly than a pound of gold. For centuries, Venice positioned itself as the sole gatekeeper of this incredibly lucrative trade. The spices' journey was long and perilous. Arab and Indian sailors carried them across the Indian Ocean. Long camel caravans moved them across Arabia's deserts. They finally arrived at the great Mediterranean ports of Alexandria, in Egypt, and Aleppo in Syria. It was here, at Europe's threshold, that the Venetians were waiting. Through a combination of advantageous diplomatic treaties with Egypt's sultans, their navy's raw power, and their network of strategic island colonies, Venice established a virtual monopoly. No other European power could effectively buy spices at their source. This trade's lifeblood was the great Venetian merchant galley. These massive, primarily sail-powered ships, often travelling in protected convoys, would arrive in Alexandria laden with European goods like Flemish wool and German iron. They'd exchange these for precious cargo from the east, then begin the triumphant journey home, their holds filled with fragrant, priceless dust that was the Republic's fortune's foundation. A spice convoy's arrival in Venice was a moment of citywide celebration. Ships would unload their cargo at the Rialto's bustling markets, the air filling with exotic Orient scents. Here, under state inspectors' watchful eyes, every sack of pepper was weighed, taxed and sold to the city's merchant houses. From Venice's warehouses, spices were then distributed to the rest of the continent. This monopoly's immense profits funded the city's splendour. It paid for magnificent marble palaces lining the Grand Canal. It paid for breathtaking artworks by Titian and Veronese. It paid for powerful war fleets built in the arsenal. Venice, a glittering jewel on water, was a city built on a mountain of spice. Venice was now at its wealth's peak. Its maritime empire funneled the East's riches into its coffers. But this success created a new, dangerous vulnerability. For centuries, the Republic's only real threats had come from the sea, a challenge they'd mastered. Now a new danger was growing on their very doorstep. Powerful, aggressive states consolidating on the Italian mainland. The greatest of these was the Duchy of Milan, ruled by the ambitious expansionist Visconti family, whose goal was conquering all of northern Italy. Venice's leaders realized their lagoon was no longer a perfect defense. A powerful enemy controlling the shore could cut off vital food supplies and sever land trade routes running from Venice over the Alps into the rest of Europe. The sea had made them rich, but the land could make them starve. This new threat sparked fierce political debate within the Doge's palace. One noble faction, the traditionalists, argued that Venice was a creature of the sea. They warned that involvement in Italy's treacherous, expensive land wars would be a disastrous mistake, betraying the city's true nature. The other faction, the expansionists, argued they had no choice. To remain secure, Venice had to control its own backyard, forging a deep defensive buffer zone on the mainland. After a long struggle, the expansionist party won the debate. In the early 15th century, under Doge Francesco Foscari's leadership, Venice made a radical shift in grand strategy. It began a long, costly series of wars to conquer the territory behind it. This was the birth of the terra firma, the state of the land. The conquest campaign was swift and successful at first. Through skillful diplomacy and decisive military action, Venice took control of nearby cities, Padua, then Vicenza, and finally the great city of Verona. This expansion gave them control of major rivers and the Veneto region's fertile farmlands. For the first time, Venice had secured its own food supply. This was a monumental change for the Republic. Venice was no longer just a maritime empire. It was now a major Italian land power as well. This new land empire would bring the city great security and new resources. But it would also embroil Venice in a century of brutal, complex, expensive land wars, a very different kind of conflict from the naval battles they'd mastered, demanding a new kind of soldier to fight it. Venice had committed itself to a new future of conquest on the Italian mainland. But the Republic of Merchants faced a serious problem. Its citizens were sailors and shipbuilders, not professional land soldiers. To fight its wars on the terra firma, Venice, like other great Italian states, turned to the masters of Renaissance warfare, the condottieri. A condottiero was a professional mercenary captain who didn't fight for patriotism or a king. He fought for a contract, the condotta. This contract specified his pay, the number of troops he'd provide, and his service's duration. These captains were entrepreneurs of violence, running their own private armies complete with heavily armoured cavalry and infantry. Often minor nobles, they saw warfare as a path to wealth, power, and fame. This system created a unique warfare style. It was a business. A condottiero's most valuable assets were his experienced soldiers and expensive war horses. He was often reluctant to risk these assets in bloody decisive battles that could wipe out his army and livelihood. Warfare often became a slow, complex game of manoeuvre, long sieges and strategic skirmishes. The goal was outsmarting your opponent and capturing territory with minimal losses. Betrayal was also common. A captain might switch sides mid-war if a rival state offered a better contract. The pragmatic Venetians used these mercenaries because they had to, but deeply distrusted them. The Republic's greatest fear was that a successful popular general could become a military dictator, using his army to overthrow the state, as had happened in other Italian cities. Because of this, Venice constantly monitored its own generals, sending political officials to watch over them in the field and report back to the dreaded Council of Ten. The most famous and tragic example of this mistrust is the story of the great general Francesco Busson, known as Carmagnola. A brilliant condottiero originally serving Venice's rival Milan, Venice hired him away with a massive contract, and he won several major victories for the Republic. He became a celebrated hero, but the state soon began suspecting his loyalty. They questioned his lack of aggression in later campaigns, suspecting secret contact with his former Milanese employers. In 1432, the Venetian government acted with chilling precision. They invited their celebrated general back to the city, supposedly to discuss future strategy. Carmagnola was welcomed with great honour at the Doge's palace, but as he entered a side chamber, the doors locked behind him. He was arrested by order of the Council of Ten. After a secret trial for treason, he was found guilty. He was led out into Piazza San Marco between the two great columns and publicly beheaded. Carmagnola's story was a brutal, unmistakable message to all who would serve the Republic. Venice would use the condottieri to conquer its land empire, but it would never, ever trust them. This was the violent, paranoid world of Renaissance land warfare. The price Venice paid to forge and defend its terra firma, its empire on land. But Venice's story is one of constant contrast. While its hired generals fought grimly on Italy's dusty plains, the city they were protecting was being transformed by a river of gold flowing from the east. This incredible wealth didn't just fund wars, it created a unique, magnificent way of life. The Great Spice convoys brought unimaginable wealth into Venice, transforming the city, funding its art and architecture, and shaping daily life on its unique watery streets. And no symbol is more connected to the city's life than its most famous vessel, the gondola. For centuries, Venice's canals were its roads. Everything and everyone moved by boat. The gondola evolved as the perfect vehicle for this unique environment. Its design is a work of subtle genius, long and slender to navigate the narrowest canals, flat-bottomed to clear shallow waters, and most cleverly its hull is asymmetrical, built with a slight curve. This asymmetry allows a single gondolier standing at the stern with a single oar to propel the boat in a straight line. The gondoliers themselves were a powerful, respected part of Venetian life, members of a historic, tightly controlled guild who knew the city's labyrinthine canal network's secrets better than anyone. They were the city's taxi drivers, its confidants, and silent witnesses to its many secrets. During the Renaissance's height, the gondola became a status symbol. Wealthy noble families competed fiercely to own the most lavishly decorated boat, adorning their gondolas with rich, colourful fabrics, intricate carvings, and gleaming gold leaf. The canals filled with these magnificent floating displays of private wealth, a stark contrast to the Republic's ideal of public modesty. The state decided to stop this ostentatious competition. In 1562, the Venetian government passed a sumptuary law designed to curb extravagant spending. It decreed that all gondolas, with the exception of a few ceremonial state boats, must be stripped of their decorations and painted a uniform, simple black. This law perfectly encapsulated the Venetian mindset, enforcing a public image of sober republican equality, forcing the city's powerful nobles to conceal their immense wealth behind a veil of uniformity. The black gondola became an icon, a symbol of Venice's unique culture, a city of outward modesty that hid a world of private luxury. This law, controlling even a boat's colour, was a perfect example of the Venetian state's power over its citizens' public and private lives. And this obsession with control extended from the canals into the most sacred and dangerous realm of all, religious belief. Across Renaissance Europe, the Catholic Church had a powerful, feared tool for enforcing its doctrine, the Inquisition, a special court tasked with finding and punishing heresy, beliefs contradicting the Church's official teachings. But the Republic of Venice, as always, did things its own way. While a devout Catholic state, it famously insisted on running its own state-controlled Inquisition. The reason was pure pragmatism. The Venetian state was built on international trade. Its city was a cosmopolitan melting pot filled with foreign merchants, including German Lutherans, Orthodox Greeks, and Jews. An overly zealous Rome-controlled Inquisition could trigger diplomatic incidents and disrupt the vital trade relationships that were the city's lifeblood. For Venice, commercial stability was as important as religious purity. The Venetian system was unique. The tribunal itself was composed of religious figures, including the papal nuncio and Venice's patriarch. But there was a crucial difference. 3 lay observers were required at every trial, Venetian noblemen appointed by the state, known as the Savialeresia. These observers had no vote in the verdict, but their presence ensured the state monitored all proceedings, and the Republic's interests were always protected. They could suspend a trial if they felt it was politically motivated or damaging to Venice. As a result, the Venetian Inquisition was generally considered less brutal and more pragmatic than its counterparts in Spain or Rome. Its focus was on public repentance and conformity, not mass executions. While it did prosecute people for heresy, its methods were always tempered by the state's need for stability, especially concerning the city's large German merchant community. They feared Protestantism's spread could become a source of political unrest. This independent streak led to constant tension with the papacy in Rome. The Pope saw Venice's state-controlled Inquisition as a challenge to his authority. This was part of a larger pattern for the Republic. Venice consistently prioritized its own state interests over the Church's demands, a stance unique among Italian states. The Venetian Inquisition is a perfect example of the Republic's unique character. It was a city that managed to be both deeply pious and fiercely independent, finding a way to balance faith's demands with the practical necessities of running a global commercial empire. Even in the sacred, terrifying matter of heresy, Venice's final loyalty was to the state and the Republic's stability. But that hard-won stability, so carefully guarded from within, was about to face its greatest ever threat from the outside. Venice's golden age of commercial supremacy wasn't destined to last forever. Throughout the 15th and 16th centuries, a formidable new power rose in the east, the Ottoman Empire. Constantinople's fall to the Sultan in 1453 was a seismic shock to the Venetian world, placing a mighty, aggressive empire in direct control of their vital trade routes to the Black Sea. What followed was a century of relentless, draining warfare. One by one, Venice's valuable ports and islands in the Aegean, its Stato de Mar, came under attack. The Republic found itself in a constant, incredibly expensive struggle to defend its maritime empire from the Ottomans' might. This long conflict reached a breaking point in 1570, when the Ottomans launched a massive invasion of the rich, strategically vital, Venetian-held island of Cyprus. Venice, knowing it couldn't face the full Ottoman navy's might alone, sent desperate pleas across Europe for a new crusade. In response, a holy league of Christian powers was formed. Spain's fleets, the Papal States, and other Italian states joined with Venice to confront the Turkish menace. The result was the largest naval battle fought in the Western world since antiquity, the Battle of Lepanto. In autumn 1571, the 2 colossal fleets met in the Gulf of Patras off Greece's coast. The sight must have been breathtaking. On one side, over 200 Ottoman galleys, their oars churning the sea. On the other, the combined Christian fleet of similar size, a forest of masts and banners. This would be the last great battle in history fought primarily by oar-powered galleys. At the Venetian fleet's heart were 6 revolutionary new warships called galleasses, massive hybrid ships taller than normal galleys, packed with a formidable number of cannons, acting as floating fortresses. As battle began, the Venetian galleasses were towed in front of the main Christian line and unleashed a devastating cannon fire barrage, smashing the Ottoman formation before the main fleets even clashed. What followed was brutal, chaotic, and incredibly bloody. For hours, the 2 fleets grappled in swirling battle. The sea filled with the crash of ramming ships and cannons' roar. Galleys locked together, fighting becoming desperate hand-to-hand struggles on blood-slicked decks. The Christian fleet slowly gained the upper hand. Their superior firepower made the difference. Venetian and Spanish soldiers boarded the Ottoman flagship. In a climactic struggle, they captured the vessel and killed the Ottoman admiral. The sight of their admiral's banner falling sent panic waves through the Turkish fleet. The battle turned into a rout. The victory at Lepanto was absolute and overwhelming. The Ottoman fleet was annihilated. Thousands of Christian galley slaves were freed from their oars. News of victory was met with ecstatic celebration across Europe. For Venice, it was a moment of immense triumph and pride, their last great heroic victory on the world stage. However, the triumph was short-lived. The Holy League soon fell apart due to political infighting. Venice, left to face the Ottomans alone, was eventually forced to cede the island of Cyprus in a treaty. The great victory at Lepanto was a glorious military achievement, but it couldn't reverse the long, slow tide of history now running against the Republic. The true threat to Venice's future wasn't an Ottoman fleet, but a new map of the world being drawn by a rival nation's daring explorers. At the 15th century's end, Venice's wealth was built on its absolute monopoly on the spice trade. All of Europe had to buy its pepper and cinnamon from Venetian merchants at high prices, but for decades the Kingdom of Portugal, under the guidance of figures like Prince Henry the Navigator, had been systematically investing in a different path. They sponsored voyages pushing further and further down Africa's unknown coast. They developed new, more resilient ships like the Caravel, designed to withstand the harsh Atlantic Ocean. Their goal was singular and obsessive: find a direct sea route to the Indies and break the Venetian monopoly forever. In 1488, explorer Bartolomeo Diaz finally rounded the Cape of Good Hope, proving the Indian Ocean could be reached. The path was open. A decade later, in summer 1497, a determined Portuguese captain named Vasco da Gama set out from Lisbon with 4 small ships to complete the mission. His journey was an epic of survival. He battled ferocious Atlantic storms, lost many crew to scurvy, and fought his way past hostile African traders who saw him as a rival. Finally, after 10 grueling months at sea, his battered fleet dropped anchor in the port of Calicut, India, in May 1498. He had done it. For the first time, a European navigator had sailed from Europe to India. News of da Gama's successful return travelled slowly, first as rumour whispered in marketplaces, then as terrifying confirmed fact in diplomatic letters. When the news was finally made public in Venice, it was met with horror. Venetian diarist Girolamo Priuli wrote that it was the worst news the Republic could ever have received. The city's far-sighted merchants understood the devastating implications immediately. Their entire economic model was now obsolete. The Portuguese could ship spices directly to Lisbon for a fraction of the cost, shattering the foundation of Venetian wealth. The Republic didn't surrender its position without a fight. They tried diplomacy, attempting to forge an alliance with Egypt's Sultan to fight the Portuguese in the Indian Ocean. They even considered one of the age's most audacious engineering schemes, digging a canal at Suez to get their own fleet into the Red Sea. But it was too late. The world had fundamentally changed. Venice hadn't been defeated in a great battle. It had simply been bypassed. The world's economic gravity centre was shifting from the Mediterranean's familiar waters to the Atlantic's vast open expanses. The great age of discovery had ironically become the cause of Venice's long, slow, irreversible decline. Venice's immense wealth's foundation was crumbling. But the city wouldn't collapse into ruin. Instead, faced with a world that no longer needed it as a marketplace, the Republic began a magnificent final transformation. It decided that if it could no longer be the world's most powerful city, it would become its most beautiful, most captivating, and most entertaining one. As its political power slowly faded throughout the 17th and 18th centuries, its cultural power exploded. Venice became the essential destination on the Grand Tour, a rite of passage for wealthy young men from across Europe, especially Britain. They journeyed to the continent to complete their education, and Venice was their playground. They came seeking not its commercial power, but its artistic treasures, beautiful music and legendary reputation for sophisticated, decadent freedom. Far from their home country's rigid social rules, they found liberation. The ultimate expression of this new identity was the famous Carnival of Venice, not a short festival, but a months-long season of public celebration and masquerade balls that took over the entire city. The central feature was the mask. Behind a simple papier-mâché mask, a nobleman could mingle with a commoner, and a commoner could feel like a king. The mask's anonymity dissolved the city's rigid social structures, creating an atmosphere of intrigue, romance, and illicit adventure in the labyrinthine streets. This was the era when Venice became the undisputed capital of pleasure. The city opened the Western world's first public legal gambling house, the Ridotto. Here, under the state's watchful eyes, masked aristocrats and wealthy, travellers risked entire fortunes in silent high-stakes games of chance. It was also the golden age of famous Venetian courtesans, highly educated, cultured women celebrated in art and poetry. And it was the birthplace of public opera, with magnificent theatres attracting the world's best singers and composers. This final era was also a last brilliant golden age for Venetian art and music. It was the city of composer Antonio Vivaldi, whose vibrant, energetic concertos, many written for the all-female orchestra at the city's orphanage, became the soundtrack to this gilded age. It was also the city of the great view painter Canaletto. His breathtakingly detailed, sun-drenched paintings of the Grand Canal and St. Mark's Square were the ultimate souvenirs for Grand Tour travellers. His work was so precise and evocative that it defined the world's image of Venice for centuries to come. As the 18th century drew to a close, Venice was a city of breathtaking beauty, and also a city of profound political stagnation. The Republic was a living museum, a capital of pleasure, but its military was a shadow of its former self. Its ancient oligarchic government was ill-equipped to deal with the violent new forces about to be unleashed upon Europe. That new force was the French Revolution. Its instrument was a brilliant, utterly ruthless young general named Napoleon Bonaparte. In 1796, Napoleon's revolutionary army swept into northern Italy, shattering the old Austrian order in a series of lightning-fast victories. The Republic of Venice, clinging to its long-held tradition of neutrality, desperately tried to stay out of the conflict. But in this new age of revolutionary warfare, there was no room for neutrality. Napoleon, having conquered the surrounding lands, accused Venice of being secretly hostile to France. He marched his armies to the very edge of the lagoon. For the first time in over 1,000 years, a hostile army stood at Venice's shores. Napoleon issued a stark ultimatum to the Doge and Great Council. They must dissolve their ancient government and establish a new democratic municipality aligned with France. If they refused, his army would be Attila to the Venetian state. The threat was clear: surrender or face total destruction. The final agonizing debate took place within the Doge's palace. The ruling families assembled in the Great Council chamber, their faces pale with fear. They knew the reality of their situation. Their small army was no match for Napoleon's hardened veterans. Their city was indefensible against modern artillery placed on the shore. They faced an impossible choice: make a heroic but suicidal last stand that would see their magnificent city burned and looted, or accept a quiet, humiliating surrender that might at least preserve Venice itself. On May 12, 1797, the last Doge of Venice, Ludovico Manin, addressed the council with tears in his eyes. He told them the Republic was finished and urged them to accept the French terms. As the vote was being taken, the sound of a few musket shots from outside sent panic waves through the chamber. Believing a revolt had begun, or that the French were already attacking, the noblemen voted in a rushed, undignified scramble. The 1,000-year-old Republic of Venice did not end with a roar of defiance. It ended with a whimper of fear. The final moments were filled with profound, quiet sadness. Doge Ludovico Manin returned to his private apartments, removed his ducal cap, the corno ducal, and handed it to his servant, saying simply, "Take it, I shall not be needing it again." A few days later, French troops entered St. Mark's Square, the first time a foreign army had ever occupied the city. They looted its treasures. They took the 4 great bronze horses from the basilica and shipped them to Paris as spoils of war. The magnificent golden Bucintoro was publicly broken apart and burned for its gold. The surrender to Napoleon in 1797 marked the end of the 1,000-year-old Republic of Venice. The great political and military power was gone forever. For the next several decades, the city itself became a prize passed between the empires of France and Austria, before finally joining a newly unified Italy in 1866. But while the Venetian state was dead, the city and the idea of Venice remained. Its true legacy was no longer in its fleets or colonies, but in the profound, lasting mark it had left upon the world. That legacy can still be found in the very language of modern finance and commerce. As pioneers of international trade and early capitalism, the Venetians gave us many words we still use today. The word bank comes from the Italian banco, the simple bench a merchant would use in the square to conduct his business. Accounting terms like debit and credit were perfected in Venetian merchants' ledger books, and the word quarantine comes directly from their public health policy of isolating ships for 40 giorni, 40 days, a practice born from their constant struggle with plagues arriving on their trading ships. The most visible legacy, of course, is the city itself. To walk through Venice today is to walk through a living museum. To stand in St. Mark's Square is to be in the Republic's grand reception room, surrounded by the glittering Byzantine-influenced mosaics of St. Mark's Basilica and the seat of 1,000 years of government in the Doge's palace. From the palace you can cross the famous Bridge of Sighs into the grim state prisons. You can still see the arsenal's high red brick walls and imagine the thousands of workers who once launched a fleet in a day. You can stand on the iconic Rialto Bridge, the empire's commercial heart. It's a city whose every stone tells a story, but to see Venetian power's true scale, you must travel to its former colonies. The Trail of the Lion of St. Mark is carved into stone across the Mediterranean. At the farthest reach of their influence, the massive Venetian walls of Famagusta on Cyprus stood as the final eastern outpost. From there, the heart of their Aegean power was the crown jewel of their overseas empire, the island of Crete. In the beautiful port city of Chania, the entire old harbour is a complete Venetian creation. In the capital, Heraklion, the colossal walls and seaside fortress are a testament to the centuries Venice spent defending its most precious colony. Moving back toward Venice, the Greek island of Corfu served as the heavily armed gateway to their home waters, its magnificent old and new fortresses still dominating the city. The trail continues north up the Adriatic coast into modern-day Croatia and Montenegro. The breathtaking fortifications of Kotor and the defensive works of Zadar, the very same city of Zara from our story, showcase their absolute dominance of this coastline. These great fortresses of the sea are so significant they're part of a grand UNESCO World Heritage Site called the Venetian Works of Defence. This same site also honours the fortifications of Venice's powerful land empire, the Stato da Terra. On the Italian mainland, Bergamo's powerful walls still loom over the modern city, a 4-mile circuit of massive stone bastions and monumental gates encircling the entire historic hilltop town. At Peschiera del Garda, the Venetians transformed an island at a lake river's mouth into a formidable pentagonal fortress, its powerful ramparts rising directly from the waters. And on the eastern frontier stands the incredible fortress city of Palmanova, a perfect 9-pointed star designed by the Renaissance's most brilliant military architects, a stunning, complete example of a utopian city built as an ideal military machine. It's a final, powerful testament to Venice's need to fight and build on both land and sea. These aren't just beautiful tourist sites. They're enduring stone and marble echoes of a city that once commanded the sea, the powerful footprints of the Lion of St. Mark, still visible to any traveller who knows where to look. In the end, Venice's greatest legacy is its story. It's the story of a community born from fear in a place with no natural advantages that used its ingenuity, political stability, and ruthless focus on the sea to become one of the world's most powerful and influential states. The Lion of St. Mark no longer rules a great maritime empire, but the spirit of the impossible city built on water, the most serene republic, continues to endure as a timeless testament to human resilience and ambition. And so our story of Venice comes to a close. It has been a true pleasure to be your guide through the history of this unique and beautiful republic. Thank you for listening. Until our next journey into the past, I wish you a calm and peaceful night.